Here's something most people get completely wrong about empaths. When they see someone who's highly sensitive, deeply perceptive, someone who doesn't have a huge social circle or doesn't show up to every gathering, they assume something must be off. They think this person must struggle to connect. They probably don't know how to hold a conversation. Maybe they're just awkward. But that assumption, it's completely backwards. Empaths aren't people who can't connect. They're people who connect so deeply that most surface-level interactions feel like trying to have a real meal and being handed a picture of food instead. They read tone, they catch micro-expressions, they sense what's underneath the words, the tension hiding behind a smile, the anxiety masked by laughter, the disconnect between what someone says and what they actually feel. So no, the empath's smaller social circle isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign of something far more interesting, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that is. Let's start with something a lot of empaths quietly struggle with: small talk. For most people, casual conversation is easy, even enjoyable. A quick chat about the weather, weekend plans, the latest show everyone's watching. It's light, it's simple, it fills the silence. But for an empath, it often feels like wearing a costume that doesn't fit. When you're wired to perceive what's beneath the surface, conversations that stay on the surface feel hollow. Not because empaths are snobs or think they're better than anyone, but because their nervous system is essentially tuned to a different frequency. They're picking up on subtext, on emotion, on authenticity, and when none of that is present, the whole interaction starts to feel almost disorienting. Like watching a movie where the audio and the video are slightly out of sync, the words are there, the smiles are there, but nothing lands. And so over time, empaths naturally start to pull back from those kinds of interactions, not out of arrogance, but out of a quiet, deeply felt preference for something real. Now, here's where a lot of people misread the situation. When an empath steps back from certain friendships or declines certain social invitations, people around them often interpret it as fear, social anxiety, shyness, maybe even coldness. But what's actually happening is something much more intentional. It's discernment. Empaths aren't retreating from people because they're afraid of connection. They're stepping away from misaligned connection. There's a difference, a big one. Think about it. When you can feel the emotional undercurrent of every room you walk into, you start to notice which dynamics feel honest and which ones feel performed. You notice who shows up fully and who shows up out of habit. And quietly, without making a big announcement about it, empaths start opting out of the inauthentic ones. No more forced laughter at jokes that aren't funny. No more pretending to care about conversations that feel empty. No more matching energy that's one-dimensional or draining. This isn't the empath becoming less social. It's the empath becoming more precise. Their circle doesn't shrink because they've failed at friendship. It shrinks because they've filtered it. And filtration, done right, isn't a loss. It's a refinement, but let's be honest, there is a cost to this. When you hold yourself to a standard of depth and genuine presence, you'll find that fewer and fewer people can actually meet you there. Not because people are bad, but because depth is rare. Real, mutual, emotionally honest connection takes two people who are both willing to show up without a mask. And that combination doesn't come along often. So the trade-off becomes clear: more solitude, but solitude that breathes, quiet that feels like rest instead of loneliness, time alone that recharges rather than reminds you of what's missing. And this is where the real mindset shift happens, the one that changes everything for empaths. The question stops being, why don't I have more friends? And becomes, how many people can genuinely meet me at this level? That shift alone can transform how an empath sees their entire social life. Suddenly, a small circle isn't a sign of something wrong. It's a sign of something rare. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention when we discuss empaths: the physical experience of socializing. For most people, spending time with others is energizing. Even if they're introverted and need time to recharge afterward, the interaction itself isn't particularly costly on a biological level. For empaths, it's a different story entirely. Empaths don't just observe other people's emotions, they absorb them. It's not metaphorical. When an empath is around someone who's anxious, their own nervous system starts to mirror that anxiety. When there's tension in a room, they feel it in their chest. When someone nearby is carrying chaos, the empath's body registers it like a low-frequency signal that never quite turns off. This means that socializing, especially in emotionally chaotic environments, isn't just tiring, it's depleting. Deeply, physically draining in a way that goes beyond introversion or shyness. And this is a crucial distinction. An introvert might need quiet time to recharge after socializing. An empath often needs to recover. There's a difference between needing peace and needing to detox from someone else's emotional noise. What makes this even more exhausting is something most people never see: the constant invisible work empaths do just to stay regulated in social environments. Every time an empath walks into a room, they're doing real-time emotional calibration, reading the energy, adjusting to the dynamics, trying to stabilize themselves against the current of everyone else's emotional state. It's work that never really stops, and most people have no idea it's even happening. So empaths start to respond in practical ways. They decline invitations that don't feel worth the cost. They limit their time in draining environments. They become increasingly selective about who they spend energy on, not because they've become cold, but because they've learned to be protective of their own baseline. And the way they measure relationships starts to shift too. It's no longer about history. We've been friends for 10 years, so I should keep showing up. It's not about obligation either. It becomes about impact. How do I feel before I spend time with this person? How do I feel after? Does this connection bring me back to myself, or does it pull me further away? Those two questions alone can reshape an empath's entire social landscape. Here's something that tends to happen over time, and it's uncomfortable but important. Empaths are naturally generous. They give the benefit of the doubt. They forgive quickly, rationalize other people's behavior, and often carry more than their fair share of the emotional weight in a relationship. In many ways, this comes from a kind of emotional intelligence, the ability to see why people are the way they are. But that intelligence, when left unchecked, becomes a vulnerability. Because when you're always understanding, always flexible, always the one who adjusts, you start attracting people who benefit from that without giving anything back. People who only call when they need something. People who accept your energy but never offer theirs. People who've built their version of the relationship entirely on your willingness to overextend. And then one day, with enough repetition, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The empath stops explaining themselves, stops offering more than is being matched, stops tolerating what they've been quietly tolerating for years. The boundaries correct not out of anger, but out of clarity. And this is where things get interesting, because when an empath finally corrects those boundaries, it tends to shake things up. The people who were used to the old dynamics suddenly notice a shift. The empath seems different, cooler, more distant, less available. And the reaction is often confusion, sometimes even hurt. What happened to you? But what's actually happening isn't coldness, it's precision. The empath has simply stopped performing a version of themselves that wasn't real to begin with. And here's the hard truth that follows. Some relationships don't survive this shift. When a connection was built on the empath's overextension, on their flexibility, their forgiveness, their willingness to give more than they received, removing that foundation reveals whether there's anything real underneath. Sometimes there is. Those relationships deepen. Sometimes there isn't. Those relationships quietly dissolve, and both outcomes, as painful as the second one can be, are worth it. Because what the empath learns is this: understanding someone doesn't mean you're obligated to tolerate what understanding has revealed. Clarity, even when it costs you something, is always worth more than comfortable confusion. Eventually, empaths reach a place that looks like simplicity from the outside, but represents an enormous internal shift. They stop chasing. They stop chasing validation. Stop chasing volume. Stop trading their authenticity for acceptance in rooms that were never built for who they really are. And in that space, something unexpected happens. The solitude that used to feel like loneliness starts to feel like clarity. More time alone brings more coherence, a sharper sense of self, a calmer nervous system, a life that feels genuinely theirs rather than one spent managing everyone else's experience of them. The lifestyle that emerges is quiet but intentional. Selective environments, calm, mutual connections built on genuine awareness rather than habit or obligation. A pace of life that actually matches their internal world. It doesn't look like most people's social lives, but it works in a way that most people's social lives quietly don't. So the next time you look at an empath's small social circle and wonder what's wrong, reconsider that circle isn't empty. It's refined, filtered through a single, honest question. Does this add to my peace, or does it take from it? The empath isn't out there searching for more people to add to a list. They're protecting something, their state of mind, their equilibrium, their ability to show up fully for the connections that actually matter. And at the core of all of it is something deceptively simple, a choice that most people never quite make, to connect consciously rather than reactively, to choose depth over company, and to trust that a few real connections will always outweigh a crowd of hollow ones. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're an empath yourself, I hope this reminded you that your way of moving through the world isn't a flaw. It never was.